What statistically improbable thing happened to you? When I was a teenager, I picked up a hitchhiker, and then a few years later the same guy picked me up when I was walking after I ran out of gas. Never saw him before or after those two occasions. Many years ago I had a terrible day where my then GF broke up with me, then I did terribly in a final exam for a college class, then I lost my wallet, and finally, as I was doing the Charlie Brown sad walk back home, some random branch broke off a tree as I was walking on the sidewalk underneath it, and the damn thing fell on top of me and hit me square across the shoulder and knocked me to the ground. I just burst out laughing because it was so ridiculous. I have been hit in the head by live squirrels 3 times in my life, each on separate occasions. I underwent a surgical procedure called a stapectomy to improve the significant hearing loss in my good ear. Instead, I ended up completely deaf. My surgical ENT said this has only happened to 5 patients in the US. He was doing research to try to help me afterwards. I don't know how true it is, but hey, lucky me. I was almost murdered in a case of mistaken identity. A guy came chasing after my car on the highway, waving his gun out the window. He eventually got in front of me, blocking my car, and stopped his car and got out. He came right up to my window, pointed the gun right at my head, looked me in the eyes and said, "Sorry. Wrong chick," then got back in his car and drove away. I still have no idea who he was or who the right chick was. Husband and I visited our old hometown and went to a used bookstore we used to frequent. I picked up a familiar title in nostalgia and flipped it open to find a school student's ID card. The name and photo on the ID? My husband. Turns out his mom had donated books to that store many years before we all moved away from that area. He must have been using it as a bookmark and forgotten. It's not so surprising considering we used to live in that area, but the ID was nearly 10 years old by the time we found it. That book was sitting on the shelf for nearly a decade untouched, waiting for me to come along and pick it up. Bizarre. Not an exciting life or death incident, but something rather sweet. I took care of my late father for the final 2 years of his life. He had Alzheimer's and pulmonary fibrosis, among other issues, so we had a lot more bad days than good. In the summer of 2019, I took my dad out for a date one day to a historic old drugstore that has phenomenal milkshakes, one of his favorite foods in the world. It was one of Dad's increasingly rare good days, where he chatted merrily with me about all sorts of old memories. I felt like I had my dad's former self back for just a little while. We had such a wonderful time that I intended to take him there again soon. However, this ended up being our last date. For most of the remainder of that year, Dad declined too much, mentally and physically, for me to take him out for anything other than very short grocery trips or to appointments. The following year entered the pandemic. It was a very, very rough year with Dad. In January of 2021, my father died, alone. In a hospital in another state. Our state ran out of hospital beds and he had suffered a traumatic fall that required hospitalization. That day in 2019 ended up being the last truly happy day I had with my dad and the last fun outing he ever got to experience. 3 months after my dad died, I met a wonderful man online. 9 days after signing up for a 1-year membership, because surely it's going to take time to find someone truly compatible with a shy nerd like me. A few months later, we decided to try a first date. He lived 3 hours away, but wanted me to be comfortable, so he volunteered to drive to my town for the date. He looked online for an appealing restaurant to suggest, and excitedly told me about this really neat historic drugstore we could go to. We went on a very crowded day, local festival, oops, and had to wait quite a while for a table. The waitress sat us at the exact same table where I sat with my dad nearly 2 years earlier. I was even in the same seat. 3 months later, we got engaged at that drugstore. So the beginning of the end of one chapter of my life crossed paths with the beginning of the best, so far, chapters. My husband and I have since decided to make a trip back there at least once a year. Dad really would have loved my husband. Not me, but a friend. He was a merchant mariner. Lived here in Virginia Beach. He was always calling and texting, posting pics from around the world. One time he'd been out a while, we knew he was heading to Dubai, but didn't know where he'd be after that. 4 months go by. Nobody's heard from him. His neighbor, who I was friends with, gets married and goes to Thailand for his honeymoon. He texts me one day and said, "You aren't gonna believe this shit." He said he asked a local where a good local spot to eat was that tourists wouldn't be at. Guy takes him 30 minutes from the beach to some dive bar/restaurant with no sign, no clearly marked entrance. He said it looked so shady he was afraid he was about to be robbed and killed. He goes in, and it's a legitimate restaurant. He eats, drinks some beers, goes to the bathroom. Out walks my friend, so he took a pic and sent it to me to confirm he's okay. Imagine taking a flight several thousands of miles away, getting away from the tourist areas and going into a local dive bar, and running into your fucking next-door neighbor you haven't seen in months. Shit's wild. Riding my bicycle on a commercial fishing pier as a kid, I lost control and rode off the edge with a 20-foot drop to exposed rocks at low tide. I tried to stop myself going over by planting my feet on the edge of the pier, but I knew my bike was too heavy. Somehow the bike stopped. Halfway over at a 45-degree angle. However, now the seat was in the small of my back, preventing me from getting off, and I couldn't budge it at all to get the bike back up. A fisherman finally ran over to help me, and we decided he would pull me as hard as he could and I'd let the bike fall. I jumped to the side as he pulled me back to the pier, and it worked. However, my bike was still there, not moving at all. When I examined what had happened, there was a piece of rebar sticking out from the edge of the pier, bent upwards in an L shape. And it passed diagonally through the spokes of my front tire and completely wedged my bike in place. It was the only spot on the 300-foot-long pier with anything sticking out. I most certainly did not stop myself and my bike from going over. I saw an ad on a Pepsi case at a grocery store for a text-to-win contest to see Beyoncé in concert. I figured why not, and sent a text and was entered. A few weeks later I got a text back from the same number that told me I won the grand prize. I ended up winning 2 tickets to Beyoncé's Mrs. Carter World Tour in Brooklyn and $500 on a Visa gift card. Used the $500 for some bus tickets and a hotel down the street from Barclays. The seats were awesome, and it is something I'll never forget. Back in community college, people thought I was dead for half a day. I was supposed to meet a friend on campus to go eat. I was running late because my dad wanted me to do something before I left. I don't remember what. I get to campus and there's this fountain, the kind you can walk through or run about and avoid sprays of water. Around the whole fountain is a bunch of police tape. So I kind of think, okay, weird, then I go to the building where my friends hang out. As I walk in behind one of them, I hear them telling everyone else I killed myself that morning. Turns out that a guy matching my physical description killed himself in the fountain. Between that and what he'd said to someone before doing it, along with my appalling lack of punctuality, everyone thought it was me. I always thought the Mark Twain quote of "the reports of my death are greatly exaggerated" was badass, but I had never thought I'd have the opportunity to use it. I was on a road trip with my cousins in the 80s. One of them kept playing the same song over and over by rewinding the tape and playing it again. The song was "Another One Bites the Dust." After 3 plays in a row, the driver pulls out the tape, says enough, and turned on the radio. Sure enough, that song was playing on the radio right then. Took a summertime organic chemistry class, 1 month of classes 5 days a week, then a 3-week break, then another month for the second semester. After the break I reached into the box in my closet to grab the textbook where I had hidden it and felt a sharp stab in the corner of my little finger at the cuticle of the nail bed. I was running late to class, so I thought nothing of it. I became ill with profuse sweating and nausea during the day, then violently ill into the night with vomiting and diarrhea and swollen adenoids. Went to the ER the next morning and they ran every test they could. 2 days later I started having trouble breathing and went to the ER again. My heart was swollen up half again at normal size, my lungs were swollen, and my kidneys too. Doctors kept me for 2 days with batteries of tests and after 2 days let me go as everything was going back to normal. Then I began shitting what appeared to be a white paste, and this went on for 2 days. At the end of which I noticed that my tongue and the lining of my mouth was almost purple in color, and I had a red streak from the tip of my little finger that during the day extended up to my bicep by that evening. Went back to the ER and the doctor said he had no clue, but maybe I had been bitten by something venomous. I then thought about the day that the symptoms started and went to that box in my closet, and sure enough there was a little black spider in the box. I asked one of my professors about it and he told me the county health department had an entomology office not far from campus, so I captured the little spider and went on over. The doctor there told me it was just a grass spider and there was absolutely no way it could have envenomated me for 3 reasons. He said they have curved mandibles so they can't hit the human skin. They have soft mandibles so even when they manage to strike the skin the mandible will turn and not break the surface, but most importantly their venom, which digests the proteins that stretch between the cell walls of animals, gets bound to platelets in the human bloodstream and is almost instantly neutralized. I showed him where the bite was as evidenced by the red streak, and sure enough it was in the corner of the nail bed in very soft tissue of the cuticle where the spider could actually get a strike. He asked if I had some kind of platelets disorder. I made a quick call to the cancer research hospital I worked at in the evenings at that time, and sure enough I had donated platelets the evening before being bitten. A process where they put you on a platelet phoresis machine and extract almost all of your platelets for donation to kids who are in need of them due to having low counts from the chemotherapy. It was at this point that the entomologist started hyperventilating and asking all kinds of questions. He was low-key freaking out. He kept repeating that this was a billion to 1 event and he'd never heard of it before. He ended up getting me to sign some papers so he could have my medical records and published a paper on it. Fun for him but not so much for me. The white paste that I pooped for 3 days was the epithelial lining of my entire digestive tract, which came out as white pasty-looking individual cells. By the end of the month everything was back to normal like none of it had ever happened. Interesting side note. When some spiders inject their victims and turn them into liquid that they can then drink, this venom dissolves the proteins that hold cells together by running between the cell walls. These proteins are the only things binding the cells together. Without these proteins we would be reduced to a nasty white, almost liquidy paste. Not me, but my grandfather. Weeks before his 93rd birthday, he was finishing a day of yard work on his farm. He tripped while getting off the lawnmower, and it rolled on top of him, blades turned off, luckily. He was pinned under it long enough that he was about to slit his own throat to put himself out of his misery, as opposed to freezing to death overnight beneath a lawnmower. Just before he ended himself, he happened to see a crowbar in the yard that he dropped earlier. It was just in his reach. And he grabbed it. He proceeded to somehow lift the lawnmower off of himself with it, slide himself out from beneath the mower, crawl back onto the mower with broken limbs, ride the mower up to the house, crawl up the stairs, and grab his phone to call my dad. I need a ride to the hospital. I think I hurt myself. ETA, the mower was a riding zero-turn style mower, worth a Google if you aren't familiar. It rolled on its wheels on top of him as he stepped off of its platform. With gas and the machine combined, it weighed just under 600 pounds. He survived this incident. But unfortunately, it led him down a domino effect of events that led to his death this year. While attempting to get medical treatment, the doctor's office ran a pharmacy report on my medical history and prescriptions. My terminally ill brother, whose full name was only 2 letters different from mine and we had the same address and phone number, was on a shitload of narcotics at the time, and through their search they pulled up his report and thought it was mine. They yelled at me and kicked me out of the office, saying I was just looking for drugs. I was mortified and very upset, and they wouldn't listen to me when I said it was my brother and not me. I ended up calling the pharmacy board, and they called the doctor and explained that since we had the same address, phone number, and an extremely similar name, they had to search by social security number. The doctor felt horrible and gave me free treatment, and now he tells that story at conferences he goes to. It was crazy. So of course, I had something happen to me that the doctors or nurses had never come across before. The doctor shared with me the tales of the conferences he spoke at and said none of the doctors there knew it was possible for data from 2 people to be included in the same pharmacy report either. I guess they do now. I have all 10 childhood aces. I have grandparent suicides on both sides. I have drug addicts on both sides, severe mental illness on both sides. Somehow I didn't end up dead, commit suicide, overdosed, in a ditch, or without any technical extreme mental illness. I like to think video games and music keep me away from that stuff. Despite what my elementary school and middle school teachers might have believed. I got a college degree in aerospace engineering, one of the hardest degree programs from a semi-decent school. Pretty much beat every statistic in regard to my early childhood outcomes. Make no mistake, all the stuff I went through has left me emotionally crippled, but I mostly get by. I just want to say thank you to everyone that's read this. I really appreciate all the kind words. Also, I'm by no means thriving, it's a constant battle every single day to pick myself up and get up. My son used the headrest to break a window to pull 3 children out of cars in 2 different accidents, both driven by women. 6 children in total, exactly 3 months apart. The first accident occurred one day after he filmed Stop the Bleed training available through a local hospital. The first accident caused by speed, and the SUV flipped on its roof right in front of him and he also got the mom out. The second one caused by a man who fell asleep coming home from 3rd shift and crossed a double yellow and hit a woman head-on taking her 3 kids to school. The woman needed the jaws of life to be extracted, and after getting her kids out my son checked the male driver for trauma/bleeding and held his hand until EMTs could get there. The man was life-flighted to the hospital. While my son was tending to him, the local fire department arrived and took off the side view mirror of my son's car that was off the road. My son is convinced that he will have to help others out of their cars in more accidents. I keep telling him that this is not common for a civilian. Super thankful he saw the training on what to do. I was telling my coworkers about an interesting customer of mine from a month before, who looked like a hobo but bought a very nice product and talked about his international travels, to remind them not to judge customers on appearances only. Right as I finished the story, he walked in to buy another identical one as backup. A month or so later and I was telling the story again to a different coworker, with the update that he'd appeared as if summoned the last time. And yet again he walked in right on the heels of my story about him, to buy again. He's probably standing at the locked door of the closed store now since I told the story again. I lost my wallet one night partying in Redondo Beach. About a month later I was sitting down on some big boulders that make up the breakwater again in Redondo, and I looked down by my feet and there was my wallet, sitting there waterlogged on one of the rocks. Nothing missing out of it. About a year later, the same wallet goes missing again. I'm like, WTF is going on? No idea. So a month later, I'm in a rando grocery store and the cashier sorta recognizes me and says, "Hey, stay right here." She goes over to an office and comes back with my wallet. Nothing missing. Had all my cash still there. I constantly and randomly win gaming systems. When the original PlayStation released, my grandpa was working at Best Buy. They had a Christmas party for employees and family where you could donate a die-cast car for a chance to win. I donated one and managed to win. PS2 came out and a local news channel was holding a giveaway. All you had to do to enter was send a card in with your information. Christmas was pretty cool that year too. When the Xbox 360 released, they had one in one of the stacker games like you see in arcades. You know. The rigged ones that nobody wins on? Yeah, you guessed it. Happened on my cousin's birthday too. Finally, my Xbox won. Signed up online for a giveaway. I figured since the odds were so high against me, I should buy one. So I did. About 6 weeks later they held the drawing. And I'm now the proud owner of 2 Xbox Ones. Yeah, can't wait for the next-gen consoles to release. TLDR, haven't had to buy a game system since 1995 thanks to random drawings and contests. We've reached the end of the video once again. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to get notified whenever my next video drops, make sure to subscribe. I'm posting once or twice a week. Also let me know your thoughts on the stories. Until next time.